Can everyone hear me? I think we all need to put the headset. Hello, hello. Can you hear me well? Great. So just. Do you need another one? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you? Yeah. Just checking. Can everyone hear me well? Yes? Yes? Dennis, can you hear me as well? No. Okay. Can you hear as well? Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the NDC Partnership Pavilion. It's really a pleasure to be here today to go through this very interesting session. We are going to have a lot of experts, representatives from multilateral development banks, developing countries, developed countries, international organizations, really discussing a key challenge that we have right now, which is to move from pledges, from commitment to implementation. So it's been 10 years since the Paris Agreement. It's the 30th COP, and we know through the global stock take that we are behind in terms of ambition, but more importantly, we are behind in terms of action. And the idea today is really to discuss that with this collective group and different perspectives on how we can mobilize finance to advance the implementation of the NDCs 3.0. So we will start with two sessions to set the scene for our discussion. Then we are going to have a panel, a very interactive panel. And then we have some closing remarks. So what do we want to do today? We want to foster a dialogue, and we want to discuss collectively how we can drive and advance implementation of NDCs through scaled up mobilization of private finance. We also want to learn about what has been the successful experiences that took place on the ground, what is working, what is not working, how we can learn from that. And very importantly also, we want to have a moment to reflect on some of the experiences that took place on the ground, and we are going to have GIZ sharing a very interesting study on looking into the readiness, but also how do we finance NDC implementation. So we have a very packed lined up, and without further ado, I would like to invite Mrs. Petenel Bogard, which is the Managing Director of the Office of the Technical Delivery in IFAD. And Mr. Bogard, we are going to give us setting the scene for our discussion. Please, welcome.
Thank you so much. Would you like me to? Okay. Thank you. I feel like I'm in the silent disco at the moment. It's which is a good thing, right? But it's very smart. But maybe we're talking about private capital and mobilizing private capital. And I was reflecting on that, of course, before I came to the COP. And I've been in the private sector for most of my career. I was in ING for 20 years, was in FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, for 6 years, and I joined the UN and IFAD last year, basically. So it's, and what in this journey, what I noticed, first of all, is the language. There's a completely different language in all these three organizations. In the beginning, I didn't even know if we had made a decision or not, or whether we were talking about priorities. It was really about language and the way we work. So I think, in order to bridge that gap, we need to talk to we need to learn the language of the private sector. The private sector needs to learn our language as well, but they will if they see benefit. So it starts with language, understanding each other, communicating with each other. And that is really the big message I wanted to give. Next to that, as IFAD, we are a financial institution. We are a specialized agency of the UN. We collect funds and we provide loans and grants to governments. We want government, and not only loans and grants just like that on a concessional basis, but we also would like the governments to use those proceeds for rural areas to reduce poverty and improve food security. That's our goal. So we give loans and grants with a purpose. And in order to collect and mobilize funds, initially it was enough to say we are on a mission. But increasingly we found that that's not enough. ODE is, not everybody knows the story, of course, there's a scarcity of funds. And scarcity maybe of social, and a desire to have a social impact. So what we did is we looked at ourselves from a risk perspective and we obtained a credit rating at AA+. And as a result of that, we could start issuing bonds. It's not public bonds, it's private placement, but still, we were able to do that. So this is a way to mobilize private capital. And one of the reasons why we were successful is not only because of the rating, but also because we were able to show the results. We are extremely rigorous in impact assessments. And it's very annoying for the borrowers sometimes because they have to provide all the data and report on a regular basis. But this is really the key point for us, is that we don't just want to lend money with a purpose like that, but we really want to make sure that it has an impact. So being able to show results works for the private sector. That's part of the language and the priority that appeals to the private sector. So this is the two elements that I wanted to highlight. Let's communicate and indeed make the case for them. De-risk private sector also, because this is a big part of their decision making, obviously. And don't rely only on the heart, but also on the intellect, I would say. So thank you very much. Oh, before I forget, we also have published a handbook as IFAD on adaptation finance. We've been working on this topic for almost 50 years to combine climate finance with social inclusion. Otherwise, we don't think it works. This handbook will be launched tomorrow, I think, or no, I should say on Friday, on the 14th. Also here at the NDC Partnership Pavilion. You're very welcome to it, and it provides some really good examples of what adaptation finance means. It's not only a cost, but it actually has benefit and a return, an economic return as well as a social return. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to open this and to highlight what IFAD is doing about the mobilization of private capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bogart, for setting the scene. I think your experience in working in the private sector is critical in terms of like bringing out this perspective into an IFI and bridging the language, right? And I would just add one thing. I think there's this language of public and private, and there's also one of the things that we've been learning a lot in the partnership is also the bridging the language between the finance and the environment part, right? And you alluded to that, especially on the point of showing impact and being purposeful in that sense. So thank you very much for joining us and giving your opening remarks. So you can move there. So next, we are going to hear about experiences and things that are happening on the ground. So for that, I would like to invite Mr. Jochen Regner, who is the Director of Climate Change, Rural Development and Infrastructure Division in GIZ, to share the key takeaways of the GIZ study that involve towards investment readiness, NDC financing, and good practices analysis. So Jochen, the floor is yours. You can just put you click for yeah, of course. You let me know when you're.
Can you hear me? Very good. Hello,
Check.
everyone. Good
Check.
afternoon, my dear sweaty colleagues.
Check.
You
Check.
can hear my voice is already
Check.
quite
Check.
down. I feel like a rock star after a for our heavy metal concert, I must say. And well, this is also all about heavy metal, you know, here. So I hope you can understand me quite well. Thanks for the introduction, Joachim. I'd like to launch today a study. It's called Towards Investment Readiness, which we did on behalf of the German government, conducted by GIZ with our partner Adelphi. And the focus of our discussion here is clearly on how to make climate ambition investable. And you have talked about the language, and this is really, it's not the final challenge, but it's the first challenge, I must say. So the question is simply how to turn NDCs into concrete action policies and mobilizing private capital. And there's even more I will tell you at the end of my intervention. First slide. Well, let me briefly present some major findings of the study. The study clearly shows that NDCs alone won't make it. And NDCs are by far no investment plan. They set ambitions, but not investment pathways.
Check.
Like it or not. That's the empirical evidence. And they do not set, incentives also to attract finance. To make climate action truly investable, countries need what we call to have an investment readiness, which is the capacity to mobilize capital flows effectively, both private and domestic and international, of course. Next slide. The insights of the study draw experience from 5 countries. It's Georgia, Rwanda, Jordan, Chile, and Germany, representing quite different countries, I must say, with different levels of maturity. The objective of the study was to identify factors that actually trigger capital flows. Excuse me. And the key insight of the study is simple, that investment readiness is, well, actually not a single paper document, but it's a comprehensive process that requires all hands on deck in terms of planning, implementation, learning, connecting policies, for instance, institutions and markets. And by the way, also capacity development, which is very much needed to increase the absorption capacities of the countries. So, as I said earlier, NDCs are not an investment plan. They provide political direction, that's great, but no financial logic. Investment plans, as a matter of fact, translate climate goals into an investor's logic, showing what is investable, who is responsible, and how to mitigate risks. And successful countries like Rwanda and Jordan, for instance, link NDC targets with macroeconomic planning and national finance strategies. Next slide. Some key recommendations from the study. First of all, involve private investors as early as possible. I mean, that's pretty obvious, and we do hear this every day in several fora. But as a matter of fact, it seems to be very hard to get private investors on board at an early stage. Early engagement increases the more realistic perspective on what works, why, and how. and what doesn't. And it also increases the buy-in. And Chile is a perfect example because Chile has established a kind of public-private sector roundtables to bring ministries, authorities, central banks and private banks and investors together at a very early stage. Another important thing is to build transparent data systems. What we found out is that when you have green taxonomies in place, this really fosters confidence, and it also fosters, interest of the private sector, private banking, the financial industry. A good example is Rwanda. We found out it has a green taxonomy that defines what counts as climate compatible investment and helps really match the private sector with the project pipeline. A third recommendation is that we have to integrate investment planning now in the new generation of NDCs. Let's see how this will work. We are doing a lot of political lobbying. It's not a smooth process at all. But when we take Georgia as an example, Georgia really managed very good to link NDC financing strategy directly with the national climate ambition plan. Also ensuring that implementation can be monitored and also measured. Last slide, please. Investment readiness is about bridging ambition and capital. We would like to highlight. The study clearly shows that countries that align with investment planning, financial architecture also, and stakeholder participation are best placed to deliver their NDC and at the end of the day mobilize capital. So far so good, this study. But I do have a next favorite study, so to speak. And our next study really should be on capacity development for mobilizing finance. I was this morning in a panel with development banks, and for the past 10 years I always hear the same things. We don't have enough bankable projects. There is no institutional setup conducive to mobilize finance. And most of the partner countries do have weak organizations that are not really capable to handle large-scale investments or large-scale infrastructure projects. So, my dear friends, there is something wrong. And the next study really should focus on capacity development to bring about the institutional setup that is required and needed to attract private sector capital, to attract the financial industry. And we also need to go very deep into organizational development at different levels, at the national level with the Ministry of Finance, at the regional level where you have, infrastructure promotion organizations, and on the local level, especially cities, because at the end of the day, especially cities do have to do the job of, creating climate resilient cities. So they need the implementing, the steering and the management steering capacities, the technical capacities that are not yet really in place in too many places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jochen. Thanks for outlining the experiences, giving some practical examples, but more importantly, showing a little bit the way forward in some of the areas of study, and probably to give more flavor and color for some of the elements that you discussed, but also bring other perspectives. We are now going to turn into a panel, and thank you very much for joining us. So I would like to invite to the stage. I would like to start by, already started, Kate Hughes. which is like the principal climate change specialist, the climate change and sustainable development partner of the Asian Development Bank. I also like to invite Dennis Mugaga, who is the head of climate finance unit in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of Uganda. I would like to invite also Sean Kidney, who is the CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, and Victoria Bittner, which is the Senior Policy Officer in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety from Germany. So thank you very much for joining us, for being here with us, for lending your time and your expertise. So we've been talking about private sector mobilization. We've been talking about how to give scale and align financial flows with climate goals. So I would like to start with Sean. Sean, you've been, I'd say, in this journey for many, many years, working with the Climate Bonds Initiative, working on taxonomies, working on structuring bonds across the countries across the globe. Could you elaborate and share a little bit of your experience on what you see is needed for us to align finance with climate goals and with the NDCs of the countries?
Well, let me say first, capital is moving in the right direction. The appetite from institutional investors for climate-related investors is very strong. When IFAD puts out a bond, it goes. And when the Brazilian government yesterday, or this week, closed a $1.5 billion sustainable bond, it was 5 times oversubscribed. And they got a 5 basis points premium, and so on and so on. The sustainable bond market is now at $6 trillion outstanding. 10 years ago at Paris, we were somewhere between 50 and 60 billion dollars. Now that's, if you like, an indicator that capital wants to move. So NDCs are a background framework that will support the attraction of capital if the execution works, but they're not a dependency. I say this because NDCs are full of compliance issues, planning issues and so on. What investors really want is certainty and deal flow. So they're clearly after continuity of government. They don't like a Donald Trump, Joe Biden mismatch. That doesn't build confidence. And they essentially want volume investments that qualify. What do we mean by qualify? Well, sure, NDCs are one guidance, but as you know, they're all over the place. We've got a better crop this year with a lot of variety. There's been separate work we've been doing for the last 10 years in developing taxonomies of sustainable finance, and they are broadly consistent globally. There are now 50 countries with these. They're essentially shopping lists for the future based on the science, which are not always in line with NDCs, because NDCs tend to be what the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Climate Change can agree on. And sometimes that isn't what it should be from a science perspective. Sometimes it is. This year we've got a better crop, but there are still some weak ones. It's a starting point. So my key point is investors are interested. And I can tell you, we did an analysis of 12 countries this last week, and their deal flow pipeline. We've got $4.4 trillion of deals coming through from credit-worthy institutions like IFAD that are already happening. And on top of that, we've got more. So investors are looking for more deals there. The global figure for the forward issuance program for sustainable bonds is now $17.8 trillion. The US economy is about 27 trillion. That is the pretty definite stuff that is happening. What we need, of course, is that to be 5 times more if we're going to address our climate goals. But we're not starting. We're not where we were in Paris or in the last few years. We're at a very significant stage going forward. We just have to speed it up. And what investors are looking for is enabling policies from government that will move stuff. Sure, NDC covers a lot of areas, but they need energy, transport, property, and resilience to cope with the stuff coming through. That's really it. They're the big, lumpy areas of capital investment. And some countries are acting that. A few countries have got really good plans, and they will see a lot more capital going to them in the next few years at lower rates.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think it's very good to have a positive outlook, not only of what we're seeing in terms of subscription of bonds, but also what is in the pipeline. So you mentioned a few times countries and how it's important to set up the enabling conditions and to have the leadership. So maybe I'll turn to Dennis. Dennis, Uganda has been leading a lot of work, has been doing a lot of efforts over the decades to set up the policies, the enabling frameworks to advance the mobilization of climate finance. What has been a success that you've been having so far, and what are you looking into the future in terms of scaling up finance mobilization in Uganda?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting Uganda to share our experience. I think I would like to talk about the challenges first, before I get to where we are. Um, the, the thing, the definition, the understanding of each other, knowing what it means from the different stakeholders, I think is one of the things that we have seen in Uganda that has been a challenge. Inside the Ministry of Finance, people understanding what climate change and what is climate change, what is adaptation, as simple as that, is something that has basically been a challenge. Now, we have leapfrogged because we created a climate finance unit. So we have dedicated people in the Ministry of Finance that understand the science, understand what is required to mobilize resources. We have presented a number of strategies, the policies that you're talking about, to my management. And every time they say, can you simplify what you're saying? And I have to go back and see how best can I simplify. She asked me a question, how can I explain what I do to a young person? So I have to go to that level to make sure that the policy, the people who make the decisions understand exactly what is at play and what we need to do to mobilize resources and also implement our NDCs. Now that's the starting point. Now Uganda, by creating a climate finance unit, we have actually, I can't say we fixed the problem, but at least we are somewhere. We are like 50% of the problem. Because currently, we put in place a number of policies that actually are facilitating the implementation of the NDCs, and specifically on mobilization on the side of private sector. We have a national green taxonomy in place. We have a national climate finance strategy in place. We have actually gone ahead and also worked with GIZ to develop and the NDC partnership to develop guidelines for mainstreaming climate action in the financial sector. When we are designing the national green taxonomy, banks would come to us and say, but what is green? You can imagine the financial sector that has to drive the ambition that you're talking about. They don't understand. At the global level, this is the reality. At the global level, these different financial institutions are actually aligned. But that is at the global level. When you go down to the countries, in the actual sense, the countries, the banks or the financial institutions they are in, the people they hire don't understand these things. And it means that even when we do the right things at policy level, the people who are supposed to raise the financing, to actually work and go out in the market to find this financing, don't understand these things. So we also have gone ahead now to talk about the capacity that you've been talking about. We are actually trying to see how do we build our capacity of our capital markets? How do we build capacity of the different, even the implementing agencies? Because even now when we get the money, you know, there's the direct linkage, we talk about implementation now. But even when the money comes, which we are saying is a challenge, if the implementation is not good, then we actually go not to mobilize more. So those are challenges that we face at country level that actually are not here. You don't see them. It's a few people who can talk about them, these challenges that we face. And in reality, these are actually affecting our implementation of the NDCs. Now, on the private sector side, we've also seen that a number of proponents have been coming to us and saying, where's the money? Yes, I want to come into the green space. Where's the money? And now we've tried to design a tool where you can actually online using Google, you can find which investors at a national level, at regional level, and then global level are available for the different thematic areas in terms of green investments. And this tool has actually helped, it's a game changer. We brought together all the private sector and told them, basically, if you're looking for resources, these are resources for readiness, these are the windows for scalability, these are the different areas where they think they need financing. And we are seeing actually, they're not actually coming back. They're telling us we are trying out this, we hope that we can get this. So the next time we will meet them, we'll see how best have they, how have they been able to raise this financing? Has it been hard? How can we come in as government to help them maybe unlock this financing? And we want to work with the NDC partnership to make this tool even better, to make sure that we also involve AI so that someone, when they go to the tool, they don't have to go through every fund. They can actually just put in a few elements and then the AI can provide them which windows actually to focus on. If they're in biodiversity, if they're a number of things, or agriculture, then they can find this information. So I think it has been a mixed understanding. We have we have actually mobilized last year $506 million from the external side, but the government of Uganda is doing more. But we also have seen that using the CCDR, we noticed that actually by using data, by using these models, now the Ministry of Finance, the people who are making decisions, know that if we don't do anything, actually, the effects of climate change are going to affect the economy. So now they are coming in, and these different documents that we are doing, actually, we have developed, are really helping us increase on awareness internally, increase on the ambition that we need. And I think scalability in other countries, I think NDC partnership should be working on GIZ, facilitating these developing countries to set up these different outfits in their ministries of finance, because that is where the gist of the matter is. That is where the change happens first. So you can work with the ministries of environment, you can work with other agencies, but the money is with the ministries of finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dennis, really, I think you mentioned a few points that we've heard before. So Johan mentioned the importance of governance, institutions, different ministries. So Uganda set up in the Ministry of Finance, a climate finance unit that is coordinating across, very interesting. Also the point on capacity. So you have additional capacity there, you have resources, you are doing studies, you're analyzing, but you are also showing results, right? You have the 500 million that are already mobilized. So congratulations to all the work you've been doing. And you made some provocations there in terms of like, how do we scale that up? How do we increase readiness? And then I would like to turn to Victoria to share a little bit of the experiences of Germany in helping and assisting countries in increasing their readiness to mobilize investments across the globe.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my answer, I would more go into the German side and share some lessons from Germany. Jochen left them out, but they were in the report. Thankful. And so you might know that the German NDC is based in the joint EU commitment under the Paris Agreement, and the EU has a goal of reducing its emission by 55% by 2030 and to become climate neutral in 2050. Germany, however, goes even further, and we in our Climate Action Act have the target to become net zero by even 2045. And so to deliver on these targets, we focus on three pillars that I would say make up our investment readiness. And the first is, and that was already said by Peter Nell, it's clear sectoral roadmaps. These climate goals must be translated into concrete action plans that investors can read. And for example, in the energy sector, Germany aims for 80% renewable energy by 2030. That's pretty sharp and clear to everyone that this is the goal, right? And this target is even anchored in the Renewable Energy Sources Act, and it's supported by annual expansion targets that come with that. there is an accelerating permitting process to work on that and to make it easier for private actors to come in. And there's also with that grid expansion programs, and that leads to where we are right now. In the last year, we already had 59% of renewable energies in the electricity consumption, and I just lately heard some figures that this year it will be 62%. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar, and that was, I'm a bit afraid because I'm the last one speaking here. Some of what I say has already been said. So it's on policy coherence across ministry and across markets. In Germany, we try to align our climate and energy goals with industrial transition programs, with sustainable finance rules, and with fiscal incentives. And so we have the German sustainable finance strategy. We have, you mentioned in taxonomy, we have the EU taxonomy, and that guides financial institutions in aligning their portfolios with climate goals. And it's linking policy, finance, and climate and the market. And the third pillar in Germany, I think it's the strong public and private investment that goes hand in hand. And in the energy sector, we have a very, very strong private buy-in. There are a lot of households that invest in the transition. It already started 20 years ago with solar rooftop. Now what's on vogue is little solar modules on your balcony, which many households now have. Then households also invest in solar in heat pumps. And then we have private companies that really go into industrial decarbonization, have other private companies that invest in renewable energy, large-scale projects. And the federal government is supporting this transition through our climate and transformational fund. So we are very lucky that we have a huge fund which is supporting this transition. It's currently staffed with 160 billion euros until 2027. And with these funds, public instruments such as subsidized KfW, that's our public development bank, loans and guarantees can complement this private capital. And with that, we help to mobilize large-scale investment and also reduce the risk from the private sector. And I think all this together shows that, and it was already mentioned, you need clear long-term targets, you need coherent policies across sectors, and I forgot, frankly speaking, I think this is the most difficult one, especially in the German government, getting alignment in the between the different governments that are often replaced or staffed with different political parties. That's a huge challenge in Germany. And also ministers' egos play a role here. And the last one, the public-private collaboration. And I think this three, that is, at least in Germany, our way how we can manage. I think there's a lot of room for improvement still, but we are on a good track.
Thank you very much for sharing not only the experience but also the some of the challenges, right, that I think all the countries across the globe are facing. And I mean, we had very interesting reflections from the beginning. I think Sean brought like the point of like the appetite, the interest, the possibility of moving capital, and for that we need, and you mentioned also in intervention, having a fund that acts as a catalytic role, right? And ADB works in that space. ADB as a multilateral development bank operating all across Asia has been having tons of experience in climate finance and mobilizing resources. So it'll be very interesting to hear your perspectives, Kate, especially in terms of how do we scale up and what are the practices that can inspire action across the globe.
Thanks very much. So I was thinking about this question, and I think the obvious answer is yes, we need more deals, right? We need stronger pipelines. But I think if we're really thinking about scale, we need to go deeper, right? So for ADB, those of you that don't know us, we have 43 borrowing member countries in the Asia Pacific region. But the institution was established as a sovereign infrastructure bank, right? That was what it was established. The Asia and Pacific region that we see today is a completely different region to what the bank was established to service, I guess. And so when you see these calls, the discussions in the Baku de Belém about MDB reform, I think it is needed. So in terms of private sector, we just even need to think about how our institution responds to those clients in Asia, what type of instruments it brings, what's our own risk appetite, right? What type of deals are our shareholders and our boards willing to take, and things around questions, for example, of economic viability versus financial viability. How are we assessing deals? What do we take? So I think as a setting, we need to think about, really for scale, we need to think about what type of institution we are. And ADB has certainly gone quite a long way down there. Our private sector lending department has grown massively. We had a 50% increase in private sector finance between 23 and 24, and I think part of that is there. And then I think if you look at the actual issue of private sector, I mean, many of the issues have been said there, but really thinking about it systemically, again, it's not deal by deal. And often when you look at private sector financing, it's still deal by deal that they're assessed and that they're taken for approval. And so how do we think systemically? I think within ADB, for example, we're really understanding that there is a difference between private sector financing and the bankers that do private sector financing and private sector mobilization. And the bankers are not those with the expertise in mobilization. So you need both. So you need the technical assistance on both sides. With the private sector, you need to be providing assistance on transition planning, on metrics, on taxonomies, on understanding. And then on the government side, you need to be providing the assistance so that they understand the private sector more and try to bring those sides together. And so I think, at ADB, we have a lot of that TA reflecting on what Dennis said before. We have, so for example, on the government side, we have a fiscal resilience initiative where we're helping ministries of finance look at how they bring the issue of climate into their budgeting and financial planning. So I think that systemic view of capacity building. And then enabling conditions. So one of the, sorry, I'm really having problems.
Do you want another one?
Okay. I think one of the powers of an MDB, certainly from ADB's perspective, is our ability to do policy-based lending. And so that's really critical then when you talk about some of these issues around the enabling environment and the policy environment. But again, those policy-based loans are done from our public sector sovereign lending. So how do you ensure that those bankers sitting on the private sector side are actually informing the design of those policy-based mechanisms to make sure that those strong policy signals that are needed by the private sector are the right ones. And then I think we really need to look forward as MDBs that we're not just financiers, right? We're market makers. And where now, you look in Asia and the Pacific, where are the difficult deals? Where do the MDBs really need to de-risk? We talk about de-risking all the time, but we don't really need to de-risk renewable energy in some countries anymore. It is done. The market is okay with it. So now we need to look at things like critical minerals, look at things like industrial decarbonization, look at those really difficult deals and see where we can play a part. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Kate. I think the point on the systemic transformation is very important, right? It's not project by project. We need to work at the system level, at the IFIs, how to make them more effective, how to prioritize, and how to really use, I think, more and more the very limited public resources that we have to catalyze private finance at scale. So We are a little bit behind time, so I will ask another question to the panel, and I would ask you if you could please try to stick to around 2 minutes. So I'll start with Dennis. Dennis, you shared a lot of the work of the setup of what you have done and some of the results that you have already achieved. So how are you planning your next steps? How do you want to scale up the mobilization of climate finance in Uganda?
Thank you so much. I think we are looking at now innovative windows or innovative ways of raising resources. He talked about we actually developing currently our green bonds framework, and we want to issue a sustainability linked bond as early as January next year.
Let's
So-
talk after this quickly.
Yeah, we need to talk. So we're looking at also carbon markets as a game changer. Why? We if you look at the understanding, like I said, still it's advocacy and people understanding what are the opportunities, because private sector is about opportunities and making money. So if we can show a whole government approach to carbon markets, to even the private sector, to know that actually they can invest in areas and still even earn credits or earn more by actually doing the right things in all the sectors where they are involved. So, because the opportunity is there are methodologies everywhere when it comes to carbon markets. And I think here the game changer also is to make sure that I think the COP pushes for more clear ways of basically engaging in carbon markets and giving guidance that really is going to help us back when we go back home to guide and also talk to the private sector and everyone in the government to know that these opportunities are there and we need to use them to scale the financing that we need. Then lastly, I think it's not so big, but I think making sure that, like ADB, they talked about the policy lending, using that policy lending to actually have guarantees that are going to drive private sector. So that blended way of financing, I think we've started some discussions with the World Bank right now to use part of our allocations to actually leverage more, like 8 times what you you'd have got in the policy arena for private sector, for other investments that are really good. So these are things that we have to look at. And as I said, if the institutional setup is not well set for that, then you can't actually do these things. So it comes back to making sure that the coordination is there, yeah? You have the right people, you have the right political will to do these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And maybe taking advantage of the point that you say looking forward, and of course we know GIZ and Germany has been working across so many countries providing support. I would like to turn it to Victoria, if you could share a little bit about how Germany has been supporting the mobilization of climate finance across the globe and some of the initiatives. You started talking a little bit about the internal experiences and the challenges and the practices. If you can also in 1-2 minutes talk a little bit about some of the instruments and how countries can tap into that type of support.
Now? Yeah. So, with regard to Germany's support on international climate finance, I think there are two answers to it. The first is the climate finance itself, the real money, the financial flows. Germany has always been this international climate finance has always been a central part of Germany's contribution to global climate action, and we are aiming here for making this very efficient and also partnership driven. And we have been one of the largest contributors to international climate finance worldwide and always been a reliable partner. And just to give you some figures from last year, we provided 6.1 billion from the federal budget towards climate finance, and taking into account also that what has been mobilized, private and public, with this sums up to 11.8 1.8 billion euros that Germany has provided in climate finance last year. And that reflects a steady increase from 2023, but I think it also confirms that we still continue to deliver our fair share. And within this contribution, there is this German flagship program from the German government, the International Climate Initiative, that also funds the NDC partnership. And from its inception in 2008 already, it has supported more than 1,000 projects in 150 countries with a total volume of 7.2 billion euros. That's our part of climate finance. When we speak about climate finance as a topic and as an issue, I'd like to highlight what we do with these funds from the ICI. We support projects that focus on Paris-aligned investment frameworks and on operationalizing the Article 2.1c in the Paris Agreement, which speaks on aligning financial flows and with low emission and climate resilient development. And the second part of our support here is addressing an issue that Dennis was raising, building institutional capacity, especially in financial institutions, for climate resilient development in our partner countries. And the third one is projects that focus on mobilizing private capital. And I think this integrated approach links climate finance, it links economic policy, and that ensures that our public funds can act as a catalyst for even larger financial flows. And to give some examples, we have the Greening Financial Systems program that is implemented by the European Investment Bank and the NDC partnership, and that addresses central banks. Then we have a program by IFC, it's called 30 by 30, and that addresses private banks. And we have a program from IDB, which is focusing on public development banks. So we address the whole environment of financial institutions here. And you were also talking about results-based payments. The project by IFC and IDB works also with results-based payments. So when they green their banks and their portfolios from the ICI, they receive subsidized loans, and with that raise or mobilize public, but as well as private capital that is invested in the green transition. I think I leave it here.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think the point you mentioned, I think also goes back to some of the reflections that Jochen made at the beginning of the importance of strengthening institutions and working in the ecosystem, right? So you're not one institution, it's public development banks, central banks, ministries of finance, capacity building that we've heard not only to the public sector, but very importantly also to the private sector, as Dennis mentioned. So Kate, you addressed a little bit what I was going to ask you next, because you already covered some of these elements, but maybe if you could bring some of your reflections on what we need to reach this big breakthrough, right? We are talking about this kind of scale, this breakthrough. You already touched upon some of it. Maybe if you want to share a few elements that you would like us to take back home from the perspective of ADB.
I might keep it short because we've only got 3 minutes to go. So I think, a lot of the things that were mentioned, the MDBs have the capacity to do, right? So partial credit guarantees, risk-sharing instruments, thematic bonds, sustainability-linked loans, all those instruments, we have the capacity. But I think there is often a lack of understanding of which instrument suits which type of investment, right? And so I think really when we talk about investable NDCs, it's not just about identifying the projects and the activities, but thinking on a spectrum of, for the private sector, on a spectrum of risk-reward, which type of investment sits where, and then what type of instruments do they need to address the particular thing. And so particularly as we have much scarcer resources, ODA shrinking, less public budgets, a strained fiscal space, and grant money needs to be used in exactly the places that it should be used to do that. So I think one is having the capacity of the instruments, but the second is really about good, solid investment planning to make sure that we use the resources that we have wisely.
Thank you very much, Kate. Sean, I left you for the end on purpose. You started in a very, very positive outlook and showing some very impressive numbers of what we have already achieved, the interest and the appetite in really tapping into bonds, the oversubscription. So what do we need to really reach that potential that you mentioned, right? That you mentioned the 17 trillion, dollars. What is like that we need for really reach this breakthrough and to bring climate action to a new scale and in this implementation as well?
Well, first, we need about $15 trillion a year to flow. So we've still got a long way to go. At least 2/3 of that is the recalibration of existing investment flows. If we're investing in water infrastructure in India, we just need to make sure it's future fit, which the Ganga Basin Commission is doing at the moment, for example. So have we addressed hydrology? Have we addressed the fact that the aquifers are depleting? Have we addressed the fact that the monsoon will probably fail 1 year in 5? This is not rocket science as an idea, but in practice, it's a real challenge. Getting access to the local experts in Uganda who can help with understanding resilience is a real challenge. But some things are winning. Now remember, there is no such thing as an investable NDC. Doesn't exist. NDC are background planning tools that will lead to investments. What we need in Uganda is not investable NDC. We need clean energy. Luckily, thanks to Europe and China, the cost of a solar cell in Uganda is now peanuts. And so they can do a lot more. 5 years ago, it was much harder. Well, electric vehicles too. In Ethiopia, 60% of all cars sold last year were electric. So investors need to know that, and then we'll pile in to the BYDs rather than the Teslas in Ethiopia and charging infrastructure. So really, it's about constructing, from a Ministry of Finance perspective, the storylines of where the money is needed and how it'll be investable to our pension funds and our insurance funds. Not public sector money, that helps get things going. I mean, look, KfW, for example, seeded a $1 billion green bond fund in South America, LA Green, which has been acting as a cornerstone investor for deals. But it's cornerstone to then attract other people. So there's lots of scope to do that. And Germany's been leading that area. But at the end of the day, what we actually need is the Uganda, the Colombias of the world, to identify the deal flow that will meet the kinds of requirements investors have. Now, I'm very optimistic about that, but I want to be careful to say we're only 20% of the way where we should be today. So the scaling up in the next few years has to be enormous and quick. I'll simply say global investors and domestic investors, the Zambian pension fund, the Nigerian pension fund industry, they want to go green. They tell me they're keen. They just want the opportunity. The way it works for a pension fund is not that they're going to take a haircut to save the planet. But if you can give them, including pension funds in Uganda, 2 deals, one is ordinary and one goes to risk climate change, they're going to go for the second one. And that's our opportunity because they understand long-term risk and they're trying to match that with short-term return requirements. We can move the 15 trillion we need if governments can construct pipelines of deals and make sure they are future fit. And that's where the Ministry of Finance to Uganda is so important because it can do the signalling, the guidelines, and the rules that are needed in places to make sure the deals are future fit.
Thank you very much, Sean. And I won't try to summarize because I think you did fantastically well. So again, I would like to thank everyone for your time, for being here. I think it was a very interesting exchange we've hearing from a developing country, from a developed country, from the bonds experience, and also very importantly from an MDB on how we can drive collectively this scaling up that we need to achieve the challenges that we have ahead. So thank you very much, and we look forward to keeping up this conversation and continue collaborating. Thank you.